Are we going? We're going. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Wilkins. I'm the garden curator here at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. And today I am talking about Cyclamen, which is a genus of plants that's native to the Mediterranean region, the Black Sea region of the world. They have a very wide distribution, but mostly mountainous. They're semi-evergreen to deciduous, but they always, when they have a presence, they are wonderful. And whether they're in flower and leaf, you really can't beat them. This is a Cyclamen hederifolium, which is pretty much just the most common one that we used to grow in the garden, or we still grow in the garden, and historically are some of our oldest specimens in the garden. But I love this one because if you pull back the leaves gently, if you see this little kind of woody looking thing, there's a corm under here. Wow. And it's about this big, and it sits right on top of the soil. And all Cyclamen have this special root structure. It's technically a corm, and it's a modified stem. So when it's dormant, it looks just like this kind of like flat, round, tuber-looking thing. And at the very top of it will be this kind of circular growth point, and that's the point where all of the leaves and the flowers come from. There are some species that will flower before they even leaf out. So you just have this like weird round kind of brown, purpley red ball, and then suddenly you'll just have this like puff of little flowers that come out of it. But this one has already flowered, and the way we can tell that, if you pull back these leaves again, you can see all these little kind of curlicues, which they're so adorable. One of the volunteers right now is inventorying all the Cyclamen, and when this is the plant that kind of showed her to like what to look for, and she's like, I love these little curlicues. And every time she sees one, she still goes, oh my gosh, it's got curlicues. But what's fun about them? So Cyclamen flowers, of course, if you've ever seen them, we'll see some in a little bit. But they'll kind of come up from that little point and kind of hang out, and the petals will be up. But what will happen is once they've been fertilized, the flowers will pull themselves back down into this little curlicue, and that's the seed pod. And so as the seeds are maturing in the little seed pod, it'll keep swelling, and then it'll kind of pop open. And Cyclamen are kind of cool. If you were here last week for the Trillium talk, their seeds are dispersed by ants. And so this little kind of white stuff here is called an elysome. And it's a sugary pouch that's made around all the seeds that is attractive specifically generally to ants. And they'll carry it off, and they'll eat the little elysome and store the seeds kind of in their little ant holes. And what will happen is you'll see all these like little Cyclamens kind of scattered around, all because the ants kind of were storing the seeds after they'd eaten the sugars off of them. We just like in the last 2 years, I've seen these like spotting shotgun holes in our Cyclamen, which we have not had a problem with before. And I was doing some research on it before, and I found out that in Europe there is a group of moths called the Gothic moths, and that is their host plant. So they eat shotgun holes, the caterpillars do. Turns out we have an entomologist who works on staff as one of our horticulturists, and I called him up and I'm like, hey Bill, what's going on with this? And I told him the family that the moth was in, and he's like, oh, that's an LBM. I'm like, what's an LBM? Little brown moth. There's highly technical entomological name there, y'all. But we're gonna walk through the crevice garden. So the crevice garden and the rock areas, as you've gone through the garden, you've probably seen a lot of rock work, and if you haven't been in here a while, you see a lot of new rock work, and that has enabled us to grow more Cyclamen and trial more Cyclamen. And if you go into the greenhouses and are interested in purchasing some, our Cyclamen selection has vastly improved over the last few years, and I can already tell you in the next 5 years we're going to be offering some really cool leaf patterns in the nursery. But we're going to walk through and look at some of the species and talk about some of the names, because you may know hederifolium, and you may know the ones that you go into the florist section and buy. That's persicum, but there are some other ones that are also super cute to add to your garden.
So another plant that is spread by ants is the hepatica.
Yes, yep. Yeah, hepatica, trillium. What's the other one that I was thinking of just the other day? Yeah, there's a handful that are
pretty cool.
A lot of those spring ephemerally things. So throughout the crevice garden, this is the kind of the oldest area of the whole crevice border here. But you can see Tony has already started tucking in some really interesting leaf patterns here for cyclamen. So this is a hederifolium selection here at the base of this stump. And that I think is this is either crassifolium or confusum, which this is confusum. I always tell my students, leaves are misleading, because darn leaves, if you see a heart-shaped leaf, it could be an asarum, it could be a hepatica, it could be a what's the other, heuchera, what could be a cyclamen. But a lot of the taxonomy, or at least the new names, whether there's varieties or species, sometimes do it based on the leaves, which is a little challenging. There's also some distribution things that go into it. But confusum is just they've elevated it, taxonomically speaking, from hederifolium, which is the one we were looking up there, purely because it's a tetraploid, so it has more copies of its chromosome, so the leaves are a little thicker, but honestly, looks just the same.
It's a very attractive leaf, though.
It is, and they do have a very they do have a unique pattern, and once you kind of learn the patterns of the cyclamen, you can almost identify them by eyesight. If you can't identify them by a leaf shape, you can definitely identify them by flower shape. So here's another hederifolium that we have here, that we have selected for, and we're kind of going from this kind of typical hederifolium pattern to we've lost that silveriness and have just got this kind of green silver and dark silver. And we have tags here in the garden, and they can tell you a lot of information. Of course, they can tell you the name of the plant, but we have these, it says JLBG and it says 179. So this is the 179th selection that Tony made of Cyclamen hederifolium. So I think we're up to like the 200s at this point. So the smaller the number, the earlier the selection, the higher the number, the most recent the selection. And so this one he made rather recently. And that's what I was saying about what's available in the nursery. The more we select for different leaf patterns and habits, the stronger those characteristics get in our stock. So we're pretty excited. Here's a little cutie here. So I was doing a wee bit of Googling. So this is kuznetsovii. Ooh. And I was like, when I was walking by a little while ago, I was like, oh, that's Cyclamen coum. And the reason I thought that is Cyclamen coum A is generally flowering this time of year. They have these very short, squat kind of flowers. They're kind of wide and round, whereas hederifolium are kind of tall and candle-like. And the leaves are very round. They kind of have a round heart-shaped leaf, rather than more of like an arrow-shaped leaf. And I was like, coum. Looked at the tag. Sure enough, it's kuznetsovii. And I was like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Well, it turns out some taxonomists got a hold of it, and it is a selection from from Ukraine, that only occurs in one little corner of the world, and apparently because it occurs here and there's just enough differences that somebody thought that they've elevated it to a species level. But Cyclamen coum is a species that occurs all the way from Greece all the way over to Ukraine, which, if you get out your European map, which everybody should be doing these days, that's quite a long distance. There's a lot of mountains between those two places. The Black Sea is between those two places. Yep, so there's a lot of variation that can happen in these plants that may look the same, but do make a huge difference. So let's talk a little, we're gonna look at one more thing right here. So, does anybody want to hazard a guess at which species this one is? Pop quiz. Pop quiz. Any takers? I'm failing as a teater.
Well,
This is
triangle-shaped leaf. Cheap.
it is hederifolium. But what's to notice about this, I mean, we have this plant is growing here in this crevice, and the leaves have stretched itself out just to kind of take up all of the space that crack allows. And this is what they do in the wild. They find these cracks to grow in, and they just send their leaves out to however far they need to go to get into the light. Another cool thing that's happening in this little crevice, though, is there's these little tiny little guys.
Yeah.
There's some here, there's some here, there's some over here, and this is where the seeds have been picked up and moved around, and they're super cute at this stage. I think I'll just grab my little soil knife here, pop us out one. Look at them.
Yeah.
Super cute. And if you look at this guy, so the leaves are starting to are pretty similar to mom. We have a lot solid green center, but that's interesting. And if you had the time to get up close to the babies, you would see that most of them look like mom, but there is actually a fully silver little seedling down here in the crack. And this is where a lot of our seedling selections like Silverella and Silver Tongue that you can get in the nursery have been selected from. So we're going to go down here and see a few more.
So it's not a sport.
Nope, that is a seedling.
It's a seedling, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them, we have a couple of patches that will, they're generally all seedlings. Here's a little, this is a true Cyclamen coum. Super cute little guy. Lots of flowers, lots of tiny leaves. We have a mini me series, and I think we have it labeled as hederifolium, but I don't know. I have my suspicions. The flowers look suspicious.
Did Tony study horticulture?
He did. Tony went to NC State for horticultural science. So this is another hederifolium. You can tell that because the arrow-shaped leaf. But this is a subspecies or a variety named crassifolium.
Wow! Wow!
And it's got very sharp leaves.
Spiky. Yeah.
Very spiky leaves.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it?
It's beautiful. It's almost like an imprint here of that lighter color.
Yeah, very hypnotic.
Right.
Yeah.
Three shades.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then they've got the back side of the leaf, which is even more kind of of a level of color to it. So leaf shape does make a huge difference. But one of the ways we can get away with the cyclamen, this whole garden has opened it up because we have really well draining soil. So cyclamen, grow in cold regions. They can take the cold. What really kills them is being wet. And so even though they get rain in the winter time, here the rain will wash away, or they're growing under these overhangs that protect that corm, that stem region, from getting direct water, which is super critical. There is one, we're going to walk down a little bit further and talk about persicum, which is the one that you usually get in the florist shops, that we have had very good success growing here because of the crevice garden.
What about the heat?
They don't mind the heat.
They don't mind the heat?
Nope. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. You get balanced here. So someone asked, what about the summer? What about the heat? How do they do in the heat? And they do go summer dormant. So they're usually awake from November all the way until about May, sometimes even later. It depends on the year, it really does. So these leaves up here, this is Cyclamen persicum, and if you go to Trader Joe's, somebody was talking about Trader Joe's today about getting their cyclamen there. they come in these beautiful like shades of red and white and kind of pink and magenta, and they're just like big puffs of flowers, big puffs of leaves, and this one here has been doing really well for us, but because of that overhang. And Brent of Brent and Becky's bulbs came down, and if you go to Brent and Becky's, they used to sell a selection of Cyclamen persicum, and he said the most successful place he had, and he was able to grow it outside in the winter time and in the summertime, was because he put it under the overhang of his house where it got no water whatsoever. And Tony went, that's an interesting idea. And so over at his private residence over across the parking lot, underneath the eaves of his house, he planted some of these bulbs that Brent had recommended. Sure enough, if you wouldn't believe it, all these florist cyclamen are just growing in these dead, dry, rocky beds. They get a splash of water if it rains and blows the right way, and they are happy as Larry, and they're seeding around. Worst weed to have, right?
Really?
So we've had a lot of really good success with that, and I'm pretty excited about that. I've tried it in my garden, and it's been marginally successful with all the species. I haven't tried persicum yet.
Is that a volunteer?
It is. It is. There is a volunteer cyclamen here along the road. And so talking about volunteer cyclamen, if you like cyclamen, all the cyclamen that we grow in the for sale in the nursery are all seedlings. Those are all seedlings that we've grown for a couple of years. Tony waits for the leaves to mature, and then he goes through and selects them and throws out the crappy ones. And we give those away for the volunteers, and sometimes I just chuck them because they're not even worth giving to anybody. But those are selections from babies from the garden, and they do move around. There are some that are more happy to make babies than others, but with all the genetics that we've gotten going on in the garden right now, we've got some really cool things coming down the pipeline. Right now I have an assistant, the botanical curatorial assistant. One of her main jobs is collecting seeds, and this year is probably going to be one of our most successful seed collecting seasons for cyclamen. So next 3 to 5 years, really cool stuff's coming out of the cyclamen program. So stay tuned.
Nice.
And thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you. That was lovely.
Thank you very much.
Well, I was going to mention, even if you don't have a rock garden, a lot of them that are planted in the woodland garden are planted at the base of trees.
Yes.
So during the summer, the trees absorb the moisture and the water to keep the corms dry so they don't rot.
That's right. I usually grow at my house. I don't even like growing them in troughs or anything, because unless you have a well draining, a long deep trough rather than a wide trough. The wide troughs hold more water. If you have a deep trough, the water drains away more. I grow them at the base of a white pine tree, and they are already starting to seed around the white pine.
Do you
That's really nice.
A lot of permatil or anything?
Nope.
Yeah, put them in.
Yep. I kind of planted the corm about half in the ground, and kind of up towards, like almost like sitting on top of a root, like a little bit of duff on top of the root.
Okay.
And that's it.
I bought my first 2 coum. Okay, and I've got to, and I've been holding on them for 2 weeks to come here.
Yeah.
To find out what to do with them.
Yep. So if you have a tree that you can plant them at the base of, they'll be happy as Larry.
All right, and sun.
They can take east. Actually, well, they most prefer part sun, not too much direct sun. These guys get direct sun for the morning, and we have some that get direct sun in the west, but they don't do as well in the western direct sun. But dappled shade, happy as Larry.
Now I know what to do.
Good. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.